Welcome to the Grampians Wine Podcast. I'm your host, Neil Butler. In each episode of the podcast, we speak to a representative of the Grampians winemakers or one of the wineries in the region. We'll learn about the wines, the wineries, and of course the personalities associated with one of Victoria's leading wine regions. On today's episode, we speak to Adam Richardson, the owner and winemaker at ATR Wines located in Armstrong. Welcome, Adam.
Thank you very much.
Now, before we get started, we should explain to people who are watching this on video, we've had some issues with the internet in your region. So today we're doing this by telephone. And unfortunately, those who want to know how handsome Adam and I are, we're just going to have to wait and see it in another forum. Let's get started by understanding a little bit about your winery, where it is, and the varieties that you produce.
Yep. So I'm ATR Wines, and I'm about 4 k's or so off of the Western Highway, south-ish from the Great Western Township, nestled in the bush here, basically in sheep country that myself and a number of my neighbours have converted into vineyards. So even though you turn off the highway, you don't see many vineyards. Within a couple of kilometres, you start to realise how much vineyard is actually in this area. So I planted, I think it was back in 2006, I planted Shiraz and Riesling. Because I love cool climate Shiraz and Riesling, and that's really what attracted me to the Great Western Grampians region, was exactly those two varieties. And I actually thought, I knew I loved the style of some of the other wineries in the region, the styles they were making in Shiraz and Riesling, and I thought, well, I could probably plant some of that and make it in my style. And I wouldn't have to try to be different. I could just put my expression into that. Into the grapes, if you like, and I would have my style, and hopefully that's what I've been focusing on for the last 10 or so years, and hopefully that works out okay. I also, in that initial planting, planted some Durif as well, just a small parcel of Durif, and then a couple of years later I planted some Nebbiolo and some Tannat, which I think there's one other vineyard that has some Nebbiolo in the region. I'm pretty sure I'm the only one who's probably crazy enough to plant Tannat, but it has worked out wonderfully well.
So we've got another episode coming later in the series where you're going to talk about some of the varieties in the region. Tannat will probably get a run in that conversation, I suspect.
Yes, I think so. I think I'll probably talk about Tannat and a couple of the other ones as well.
Excellent. Sounds great. So how long have you been going?
2006 was the first planting, and I actually, I think 2005 was the first vintage of wines that I actually made from this region. Before I planted the vines, I wanted to sort of test things out, make sure I liked making those wines, and that things would go in the right direction. So I bought some grapes from some other local vineyards and made some wine from 2005 onwards, and then probably my first vintages from the vines was the Riesling, probably in about 2009 or so. Mm-hmm. Was the first sort of big enough crop to make my standalone wine from this vineyard.
And so now, what's the kind of production coming out of your winery in a year?
Well, this year was huge. This year was, I'm not a big winer in terms of crush, but this year I crushed for myself and some other customers I make some wine for. I crushed about 150 tonnes. Mm-hmm. Last year I crushed about 40 tonnes.
Okay.
So we went from a really sucky year last year to a boom this year. But on average, from my vineyard, I'm probably aiming between 50 and 70 tonnes just for my grapes in a normal year.
And what does that translate to in terms of bottles or cases?
Roughly that would be, say, 3,000, maybe 3,500 to 4,000 dozen.
Okay, so it's a fair bit of wine.
It's a lot of wine, and I actually, when I first started my idea, I was actually living in the States at the time, and I'd sort of come back here and sort of fly in and do my wine stuff, and go back to the States, and I tried to get my employer to pay for my trip out here, so I didn't have to pay for them all the time, and I did well in that.
Excellent.
So I'd come back, and I was making wine, and I'd actually ended up convincing my employer at the time to import some of my wine to the US. And my thinking was, well, if I really screw this up and it doesn't work out, I'll just be able to drink all of the wine because it's not that big a volume, because I was only doing 100 or so cases in total.
Yep.
Now I've got to the point now where I can't possibly drink all of that wine. even if I was James Halliday and collected as many wines as he does. So now it is definitely it's a business proposition for me now, and it's so it's sort of it's what I do because I love it, but it's also it's also one of the family businesses. So.
Yeah. So you've said you did some work in the US, and I think also you might have done some work elsewhere in Australia. What is it about the Grampians that draws you there for growing grapes and making wine in the Grampians?
I mean, from a winemaking point of view, it's purely the styles. And what drew me here was the styles that others were making. Best was one of the styles, Mount Langi Garand, even though it's on the other side of the Grampians from me. The styles those two guys were making were the two styles that really hooked me and said, this is the style of wine. This is the ballpark of the style of wine that I want to be involved with.
Yeah.
So that's really, that's what drove me.
So we're part of the reason for this, and we should be honest, I guess, is that we're trying to draw people to come and see the Grampians Wine Region. That's part of the reason we're doing this series of podcast episodes. So here's your answer. There's your question. Why should people come to the Grampians Wine Region?
One, because I think they'll be surprised when they get here, and it's always nice to be pleasantly surprised when you go somewhere new. They'll be surprised by, in terms of the wine, I think they're going to be very pleasantly surprised if they're not aware already that every wine they taste in the region is going to be pretty damn smart. It's not a region where we have duds. So, some wine regions you go to, some wineries are good, some are bad. But here, because it's such a difficult proposition to actually grow grapes, once you've actually grown them and then you bother to make them into wine, it's going to have to be pretty good. Yep. And I'm proud to say this region is one of those regions that, a person used to the region will go to five wineries, say, and at each winery, they're going to taste wine that is pretty damn smart. Maybe different to the other wineries in the region. Not a lot, but, we're all nuanced in how different we are to each other. But they're all going to be winners. There may be some styles they prefer over the others, but there's no duds. And that to me is a huge bonus for a wine region, because there are not many wine regions around that are like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So
that's one thing.
Yeah, sorry, you keep going. There are other things, is there?
I probably could go for a while. I mean, again, I think it's not an overdeveloped region. So people are coming here and they're basically coming to regional Victoria. They're coming to the country Australia. So we are basically folded into the land as if, we're, obviously we're not in the bush, but we're like, there's the sheep farmers who've cleared all this land hundreds of years ago. And then we've now settled in that, and we're sort of part of the landscape. So we're not, we don't have big square glass cubes that attract, thousands and thousands of overseas tourists. We basically just grow the grapes, make the wine, and we're very down to earth. And yeah, it's really that sort of an experience. We're not doing it loudly. We're doing it quite quietly, and hopefully, if everything we want to do turns out, we do it relatively stylishly. So we'll see about that, though.
But the other thing I've picked up, having spoken to a number of you now, is there's also a real sense of, while you are competitors, you are also a big community, and people are happy to help each other to get the very best wine that they can in the region.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's part of that whole living in the country thing. We're all basically neighbours. And I was out working with Andrew Toomey in my vineyard today. He came over and gave me a hand in the vineyard today because I was, I wasn't very motivated to get out there. So I thought, I'll give Andrew a call and he'll come out and do some work with me. So we were out putting wires in the vineyard and doing things like that. And it's that sort of, the other regions, it's not necessarily always like that. It's a weird thing to say, but we are very neighbourly and interactive. We certainly don't have secrets from each other. And if someone needs something they've run out of, we just, pop down to the road and go to the other winery of the vineyard and see if we can borrow some wire, or we borrow some, some bottles or something if we run out. So we're very collaborative.
Yeah, and we will be hearing from Andrew in an upcoming episode, so that'll be good.
Yes, I thought he mentioned he was doing a podcast.
Yep. So we'll certainly hear from him. Well, we also like to find out something about you when we're doing this, because it's about the wine region, but the people are what make it. So how long have you lived and worked in the Grampians Wine Region?
Well, as I say, I bought the vineyard it was a sheep paddock in 2005, and I bought it then, and I planted the first plantings in 2006, and then more plantings in 2012. I built the winery in 2010, built the house in 2011, I think it was finished. An interesting thing on that is when I built the house, the winery shed wasn't quite ready for production. So my first fermentations that I actually did on site here were actually made in my lounge room before it was finished. So I engineered it so that the house was basically locked up and sealed and insulated, and the heater and the cooler worked. And I basically had, I think it was 5 or 6 large barrels in what the lounge room is now. So I had a hell of a time moving them out and putting them down to the winery shed a year or so later when they were ready. But yeah, it was sort of cool to be able to think I've made a lot of, probably 3,000 litres of wine in my lounge room.
Yeah, no, that's impressive. What was your first role in the wine industry?
Sorry?
What was your first role in the wine industry?
My first role, interestingly enough, was I was a crush hand, which means I operated the grape receival side of a large winery called Miranda Wines in Griffith.
Yep.
There was three brothers, and I think if I can remember the name, Lou, Sam, and one other brother. And it was 3 brothers who ran a very big processing winery in Griffith. So I went there for 4 months, and I actually worked opposite a bunch of banditos, the bikie gangs. In fact, I have to get this right. I'm not sure if it was the banditos or the comancheros, and I was actually on the other shift to I'm not sure what they call the gang leader.
Yep.
I'm not saying his name, but he was a pretty cool dude. Some of the other guys are a bit scary, but he was a cool dude.
It gives a whole new meaning to Crusher, though, doesn't it? You're going on a road trip, and you can only take 1 case of wine from ATR Wines. What do you take with you?
My Nebbiolo, probably.
Okay. We pull a bottle of Nebbiolo out of there, and what's the favourite meal to have with a bottle from that?
Oh, the favourite meal to have with the Nebbiolo? I would basically have anything with it because I could put anything with it. But I would probably stick to some meat over a fire of any sort.
Nice. And whereabouts is that going to take place, that meal and that drink?
It wouldn't matter. But you know what? I've actually started to cook some nice roast meats out on the front. We've got a nice lovely fire pit out the front of the house, and we sit out there as a family, roast meats, and myself and the kids eat it. My wife doesn't because she's a recovering vegetarian. And we have a sip of wine and watch the meat roast and eat it. So that for me is the location.
Sounds good. And there's got to be some music playing in the background. What are you choosing to have music wise?
Well, I would definitely have a selection. I wouldn't have it on rotation, but I play one album after the other, and I reckon it would probably be Leonard Cohen, John Prine, Nick Cave, and Tom Waits.
There's a bit of a
Just
theme.
as the first.
There's a bit of a theme in there, I can see. And three people, living or dead, that you'd want to share that meal with and that wine with.
I reckon I just named them. I reckon John Prine, Leonard Cohen, and Tom Waits, I reckon.
And here I was thinking it was going to be your wife and kids.
I'm assuming they would be there as well.
Oh, okay, fair enough, yeah.
You're trying to get me in trouble.
You bet. I've got a number of the interviews I've got that person into trouble. And before we finish, can you please, again, remind us where you are, what your cellar door hours are, and your website and social media?
Yes, ATR Wines, 4 kilometres south of the Great Western Township. Cellar door hours, the cellar door is actually a wine lounge, where people understand that when they get here. And the normal hours are Thursday to Sunday, 1 to 5. And I think that's about it for the cellar door. On the social media is at ATR Wines, and I believe that's for all of the socials. And the website is atrwines.com.au.
And the really good thing about it being ATR Wines is we don't need to spell it because it is ATR Wines. We had a few who had to spell.
It is, yes. Yep. Not Art Wines, which is it quite often gets that, but it's ATR.
Yeah, nice.
Initials of my name.
Adam, sorry, we've still got a problem with that delay, haven't we? Thanks for joining us today on the Grampians Wine Podcast.
My pleasure. Thank you very much for having me. Really appreciate it.
No worries. This has been another episode of the Grampians Wine Podcast featuring Adam Richardson from ATR Wines. You can subscribe to the podcast by visiting grampianswinepodcast.com.au. It doesn't cost you anything to subscribe, but it will give you the chance to listen to previous episodes and to be reminded whenever we publish another episode. You can watch video versions of the podcast by subscribing to the Grampians Wine YouTube channel. We'll be back soon with another episode. My name is Neil Butler. I look forward to your company then. Cheers.